Hello there, I'm Callum Johns, and welcome to the EU in Review, where I review the Star Wars Expanded Universe as I experience it. And today I'm starting off a different one. It's doing the classic Marvel Star Wars comic run, and this is in preparation and journey to the classic Marvel Star Wars issue 108. Even though that takes place just after issue 50, which I might be caught up by the time, might not. I'll be at least able to do the whole run as well, which will be good. And I'm going to talk about these in-story arcs. So this first story arc is their adaptation of the movie. A New Hope is now called. So, I don't really need to read a blurb for that. There wasn't really one in the comic that there was. It just sort of went straight into it. So I'll go straight into my notes for issue 1. It's a different perspective with Luke seeing the battle over Tatooine. I think that's in the novel as well, and it's also one of the deleted scenes where he mentions it. Vader speaks differently. He's got a different wording. Possibly as the comics are made off of the draft script, and you'll find that with the novelization of the movie as well. 3PO mentions the spice mines of Kessel, and I believe he mentions it in the movie as well, which is a great reference to things to come, and I love how that's expanded upon in other stories. Leia shouts, "I've set mine to kill," to the stormtroopers on page 5, which I didn't realise she was that brutal. When they've got their weapons set on stun, she just yells at them, "I've got mine set to kill." It's a bit funny how that is. The Force is generally referenced in quotation marks. I'm using air quotes, but quotation marks, which is different. It's like it's something they're not sure if it's called the Force or not, maybe, and they just dub it that. I like how it goes onto deleted scenes. They put in a few deleted scenes in the comic novelization that must have been in the draft script, and so that's pretty cool. Vader says the spies that sent the Death Star transmissions are dead. I like how it says multiple spies and multiple transmissions, which lines up with later stories in the expanded universe, notably Dark Forces and the story in Rebel Dawn, which is cool. Vader says to inform Leia's father and the Senate that all were killed. This means, it's really sad, that Bail Organa would have been in either mourning for her or doubted the news about her death when Alderaan blew up. Most likely a mixture of both. Mourning for her because he probably believed that they would kill her. It's interesting that the Jawas capturing R2 is different to in the comic to the movie. That's on page 8. Another picture up there. Sandcrawler looks different as well. The whole design of the Sandcrawler is quite different. Page 10 says Vader is a Sith Lord, which lines up when they mention Sith Lord in the novelization of A New Hope. And it's the term of Sith in first mention, which is cool. It also refers to Tarkin as Governor, not a Grand Moff, which he would have been a Grand Moff at that point, just before he died. But he's probably both. He's a Governor and a Grand Moff. In the speech, they keep stating names over and over. Like, we'll forget that they weren't mentioned before. Right. I guess that's just part of being a comic and wanting to name characters. On page 17, Luke calls R2-D2 an asteroid droid instead of an astromech. So, interesting. I guess with the shape of him, he could almost be like an asteroid that's in space, but And it also has 3PO driving a speeder, which from other EU stories, like Shadows of the Empire, it's not a good idea to let him drive. Oh no. It's going to end up bad. At least Luke was there to keep him in check. Luke says that he's never been out this far when retrieving R2-D2, But it's interesting how other EU content proves this false, and of course this is S canon, so the later material is higher from it in the canonicity. He's actually been out in different parts and was saved by Ben Kenobi, which is cool. Of course, remember these are S canon. So issue 2. Sand people wear cloaks, shown on page 1, which is a bit different to the sand people shown in the movie, where they don't have cloaks. It also says, interesting, I like this line, the greatest space fantasy ever told. So you can see where they leaned more on the fantasy side of the story with that. Narration calls R2 an android. They don't know what term they want to use, I don't think. They're a bit confused there. They called him an asteroid, and then they called him an android. So, I don't know. It's interesting as well that as early as this comic, it explains why Obi-Wan looks older, which is on page 2, it'll be up here. Basically, the different environments that he's been in have made him look older. And it's also on page 2, it's interesting how owned is said by Obi-Wan is in bold. Now, there's some words are in bold all throughout the comic, but I just noted this one. Because if you say it just, I don't remember ever having owned a droid. Or, don't remember ever having owned a droid. It puts a different stress on it. And it makes sense. Because Obi-Wan technically never owned a droid, as he was supplied the astromech droid that he has in the Clone Wars by the Grand Army of the Republic. And so it would be owned by the Grand Army of the Republic, which is cool. It's also interesting how 3PO is damaged differently in the comic compared to the movie. He actually falls apart a lot more in the comic. On page 3, Leia states that her father is Bail Antilles, not Organa, which is interesting. So there must have been an original plot line of being Bail Antilles, but then they changed the name to, I guess, Wedge Antilles, and a couple other Antilles that are later on in the EU. Tarkin is also called a Grand Moff and regional governor at the same time, so he must have both roles at the same time. It's interesting though that the comic skips one part that's in the movie of the "we don't serve their kind here" when the droids have to wait outside. Yeah, it's interesting. Both lightsabers, so from Obi-Wan Kenobi and from Darth Vader, are a light red/pink colour. Choose whichever one you like. And it also misses that the droids go into hiding when the stormtroopers are looking for them outside of the cantina. So I like how George added in some of those bits and pieces. It helps with the world building and to actually have a feel of suspense to move the plot along. It's cool. Han actually says parsecs in this comic, whereas the novelization says time parts. And on that topic, Han saying parsecs actually makes sense because it is a unit of distance. It's 3.25 light years is 1 parsec. And so in the Han Solo trilogy by A.C. Crispin, it actually goes on with that and tells the story. And it's really cool because it's actually related to distance and not time. There we go. It also misses mentioning any Imperial entanglements because Han doesn't ask the question, what's the catch? When they're talking to him and hiring him to take them to Alderaan. Which I think is interesting. George actually built a lot more on the skepticism of Han and some other bits and pieces. It has a different species as Jabba, which is interesting. And there'll be a picture up here. That was later retconned to be a pawn that took on the name for business dealings. So that's interesting. And in the special editions he was actually there, but yeah. Han has an awesome line on page 14. I'll have to find this. Give me one moment. And so this says, Jabba, the next time you've got something to say to me, don't send one of your blaster happy twerps. Come see me yourself. Thought that was a cool line. And yeah, I like how Vader says that Leia's hope is making it that she can't be broken. So her hope that the transmission was getting out there and back to the rebellion was actually giving her fortitude against being tortured, which is awesome. And that's a really good explanation for it. They don't show the Imperial spy being a Kubaz. It's interesting. They just show a figure in a cloak, so they mustn't have developed the Kubaz spy for that part before. And page 15. There's a really bad art for Chewie. I'll talk about the art a bit more at the end, but look how they massacred my boy. Yeah, it's interesting as well that there are 3 Star Destroyers around Tatooine when the Falcon escapes instead of the one in the movie. That's probably due to technological constraints with the movie, of course. They don't have inertial dampeners on at the end, and they just float around, so they mustn't have a artificial gravity projector at least. They might have inertial dampeners, but that seem to knock against things, so it's either the gravity projector, which is probably both, but yeah. And yeah, some of the art in this issue I noticed looked like they just took a highlighter to the outline, and it's not brilliant. And yeah, examples will come up as pictures in editing. Issue 3, on the cover, I guess the huge ape thing is meant to be Chewie. That's what it is, I guess. Notice Kenobi calls Luke lad a lot, where he doesn't call Luke lad in the movie. And it's interesting that Ben Kenobi looks a lot like Jan Dodonna in one of the panels. They also said TX421 instead of TK421. Possible reference to THX, but nah, doubtful. I think it's interesting thinking of those numberings, how it parallels George Lucas's THX 1138 movie, which I watched actually recently, and has the numbering for everyone instead of actually having them and treating them as people. Rescuing the princess goes a bit differently. It's interesting. The officer has to punch in and make sure that cell block TX138, same prefix they used for the trooper earlier, is empty. For whatever reason. It also makes a point of Luke killing the officer. Maybe it was intended to have more ramifications in the future for him, like his innocence is going and he killed a trooper and he might have to deal with that internal conflict later. And I also find it interesting that it actually shows Luke as more tongue-tied when he meets Leia, which is a bit funny. Now, into issue 4, on the cover, Kenobi's robe is green. I don't know why. I guess lighting? But yeah. It's also interesting how the garbage masher scene is different. Definitely some things that can't be shown as well through a comic, so they opted for some other options for a couple of things in there. It also shows them changing out of the Stormtrooper uniforms as the Dianoga chases them still, which is different. So the Dianoga actually comes out of the garbage masher through the door and chases them a bit, which I thought was interesting compared to it just being in there. And Leia kisses Luke. Interesting, and in hindsight a bit awkward, but that's how it was back in the day. They didn't know Luke and Leia were sister, and so they were setting up that romance that they were going to have. There's a nice side profile panel of Vader in one part. And the Vader reveal against Kenobi looks obviously like someone used a highlighter and went over some lines. And that'll be coming up to show you on there. Kenobi looks very much like Sidious or the Emperor in one panel as well. He has a bit of a darker cloak and looks more like him. And to note again, Vader doesn't have a different lightsaber colour to Kenobi, so all lightsabers are the same colour in this comic. Kenobi's cloak falls in two parts as he's cut in two. And it's a really interesting shot as he looks like he's on fire like a phoenix, which is a nice touch. He'll die and rise again, more powerful than you can possibly imagine. Now on to issue 5. There's an interesting cover with Han and Luke on Alderaan. It looks like an early concept of it. I have an explanation of where they kept all the fighters on Yavin 4, which is on page 11. Page 16, articles. It's also funny how they forgot that they changed the name. So exactly with that, I've just got that here. Yeah. So they mentioned some other thing, but it's one of the other comics that Marvel had at the time. But it reads, we probably had a sensational reason for changing the title to The Superhero Women, and I'd like to tell you what it was, except I forgot. Thought that was a bit funny. And they also explained why the cost for the comic raised to 35 cents. That's chump change now. Back in the day when comics would be 35 cents. Oh well. And the pilot that asks if Luke's fond of flying an Incom T-65, and they don't actually say X-Wing. So they mention specifically earlier in the comic that it's an Incom T-65 space superiority starfighter. They don't in the last bit, but yeah. And it's interesting how the guy that asks him says he knew Luke's father. So that's an interesting one for you. I wonder if there were any surviving that joined the rebellion and knew Anakin Skywalker when he was a pilot. It's likely. And Luke, page 17, Luke says, and with you as a response to May the Force be with you. So it's a legitimate response, not just one from some upbringing. So a lot of people have associated and with you as a response from a Catholic background that we've taken on to say, May the Force be with you. And yeah, so but it's actually in a Star Wars comic, so it's cool. Also, it has one time the Force isn't in quotation marks when Big Starklighter says it. I don't know why, but that might have some meaning to it that is lost later on. And then issue 6. So this is the last one of the movie section of the comics. So from the start, the trench run, there's technical issues with an X-Wing. And it's really nice to see it really shows how the rebellion are using old fighters that aren't as well maintained, or they're well maintained, but they're very prone to breaking compared to the Empire's technology. It's also Blue Group or Squadron instead of Red Squadron that Luke takes part in, so it's Blue 5 instead of Red 5. And that's in the novelization as well. That's part of the draft script. Page 4 mentions space gods. So there's a concept for space gods early in the Star Wars universe, as far as release date anyway. And I do like how they give more explanation for Biggs and Luke's friendship. So there's a bit of narration stuff there that basically they explain Biggs and Luke's friendship a bit more, which is cool. I also found it funny that Vader shouts, "By the immortal gods of the Sith!" It's a really cheesy line, but it's funny. As these are S-canon that really doesn't exist. It doesn't make sense. And again, could there be gods of the Sith? It also explains why Chewie doesn't get a medal in the ceremony at the end. It's because he's too tall and he'll get it later. Simple but effective. Now, overall, the dialogue as a whole is a bit different, but follows the same storyline, of course. That's odd. I much prefer how George changed the dialogue for the movie. I feel weird reading the dialogue of the comic. Some names they use and how they seem to say everything without just showing it. It's not a show don't tell as a movie, but still. It's a bit odd. They could structure the sentences better for explaining what they want. And some of the lines are a bit cheesy and not what you'd really see in Star Wars later on in the timeline. Or by release date, I should say. The art for 3PO is weirdly shaped and compared to the movies. And in one scene, it actually looks like he could be the Iron Giant. It's a bit funny. Also, on that note, Vader's helmet's a bit different. And yeah, later on I noticed faces like Luke and Biggs look off too. Luke is very similar build to He-Man. And big and bulky rather than Mark Hamill at the time. Yeah, a bunch of the other actors are a bit off at times as well. And the art varies between panels. They can't keep a consistent facial structure, it seems. Overall, the art is okay, but not really true to the real-life actors and not my favourite style. And like I said, the consistency, they don't really have as much with the characters. But overall, I enjoyed these for the different perception based off of the first script and a different telling of the original story, and they're okay, but nothing super special. So, that's all for this episode. What do you think of the classic Marvel Star Wars run, issues 1 to 6, or even just overall? I'll be continuing this later, and I'm keen for the classic Star Wars classic Marvel Star Wars issue 108, which will be pretty cool to have a read and see what they do with it. And it's a newer year, so I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.